Hello and welcome to Cycles of Time, your weekly guide to what's happening on Earth as we make our revolutionary journey around the sun. For time immemorial, our human ancestors have created myths and meanings to help us adapt and thrive as seasons change. Join me each week to explore the intersections of these ancient cycles, from the indigenous medicine wheel to the pagan wheel of the year, the Babylonian and Greek zodiac to the I Ching, the ancient Chinese book of changes. I'm your host, Alison Dale, and this is the Cycles of Time podcast. Hey everybody, happy midsummer. It is the solstice, the extreme summer solstice this week, and we are ending our tour through Gemini season and entering Cancer season. It is the pagan holiday of Litha. There's going to be bonfires and celebrations and extravagances, and yeah, I am feeling ready for a little bit of a change. There's a lot of changes happening in this week ahead, and I'm sure that a lot of us, including me, are ready for a slightly new frequency after last week's tense angles in the skies. Last week was the last full week of Gemini season, and we're entering this week with Mercury, Venus, and the Sun entering the sign of Cancer, the crab. We spent the last week, the end of last week, in the I Ching hexagram, heaven over earth, or stagnation, known as the gate of caution in human design. And that was after gate 45, the gate of the gatherer, where we had a beautiful conversation last week with Daje Alo. It was so lovely to have her here. And so we moved kind of from that gathering energy in the beginning of last week into more of a stagnant, cautious point right after that. And we also spent the majority of last week with the outer planets like Pluto and Neptune and Saturn making square angles in the sky to several of the inner planets, Venus, the Sun, Mercury, and Mars. So if you're feeling a little out of sorts right now, or feeling like what happened last week, or like why didn't I move forward as much as I wanted to, or why were things kind of exploding all around me, that is completely understandable. I know that that's part of my lived experience, and a lot of people I've been talking to as well had a pretty intense week last week. And so I think that, yeah, there's just been a lot of planetary things happening. So just give yourself a little bit of release it to the stars, release it to the planets. Last Monday, with angsty Mars making an exact square to disruptive and transformational Pluto, my plans to head on a summer trip to New York City were derailed. And so I ended up spending much of last week gathering up loose ends and trying to tap into that queen energy to figure out a new plan for the week. This was like not what I planned, but I was gathering together all of my expenses and ended up doing my taxes and gathering together receipts and all that kind of fun stuff. And that's not exactly what I anticipated when I was recording last week's episode about the gate of the gatherer with Daje, but we can't always predict how these energies are going to show up in our world. So it was good. It actually was like a silver lining. It was good to gather together all of my ducks and then put them in nice rows as much as possible. But then soon after that happened, where I was like, okay, time to just like gather all the loose ends. Then Mercury and the Sun and Venus were all moving through Gemini at the end of last week. And so they were all making squares one after another to Saturn, who is hanging out in Pisces. And so at that time, once the squares to Saturn started happening, the gate of gathering, the Sun transited from the gate of gathering to the gate of caution. And I ended up spending a lot of that time of the week in a bit of a standstill, moving slowly and sleeping and kind of being a bit headachy, and ultimately letting my brain off the hook for having to figure it all out. I went from like gather it all together, figure it all out, to like I need to sleep. And so I ended up doing some art and going on some nice walks with my dogs, and there were a few rainstorms, so watching the rain drop down the window pane, and I took a bunch of photos of wildflowers and wrote some poetry, and, just really kind of took advantage of the energy of the gate of caution and didn't try to figure it all out or gather everything together. And through those practices, I feel like the right stuff seemed to flow through to make me feel better. And so I read a little bit more about the gate of caution, gate 12, that we were just in, because to be honest, it was a little bit of a confusing one to me. I'm like, what does this actually mean? And it basically is saying that, like, we shouldn't waste words on unimportant things, and it's a time to kind of take a step back to assess the situation and not try to puzzle piece everything together, and also to speak from the heart when the timing is right through our art and poetry and like the truth of your own expression bubbling to the surface. And so that was just really interesting how both of those gates showed up for me last week when I didn't really expect them to in that particular way at all. And yeah, those squares were pretty interesting energy. Square angles, for those of you who aren't so familiar with astrology, squares represent doorways, and they're known as kind of like malefic angles, or, squares and oppositions are kind of more tense angles, whereas trines and sextiles are more flowing, harmonious angles of just how the planetary alignments are in the sky. But I see square angles as representing doorways. Like, you look at a doorway, rectangular doorway, and it's kind of like a square can be really confronting at first, like a door's being slammed in your face. But then once you're able to kind of figure out how to open the door and walk through it to the other side, there's a big learning opportunity with a square. And oftentimes people with a lot of squares in their chart have challenges, but also opportunities to really up-level a lot throughout their life. And so all of these squares in a row, it was just like one after another. And it really felt like, okay, I'm going to treat these as threshold moments this week and as opportunities to learn something from a seeming challenge. And it kind of worked, It was definitely intense. There were a lot of really good memes going around the internet about especially Mars square Pluto, just kind of how explosive that can be with those two intense planets meeting up in that tense angle. But this week, we're moving beyond those. We're moving beyond the square angles and also beyond the standstill energy of the gate of caution. And hopefully last week we were able to learn some things and cross some thresholds and be kind of new, improved selves in this brand new reality of a whole new season of the year. We're now entering the season of Cancer with the summer solstice, and we're bringing that in with the first of 2 Capricorn full moons. And then we're also moving into the gate of extremes tomorrow on Tuesday. So we've made it a quarter of the way through the wheel of the year already since I began this podcast. And I want to thank you all for being here for this experiment with me. I'm really grateful for all of you listeners and readers and people who have engaged and commented and told me how it's showing up for you. I really appreciate all of that. I also want to give a special shout out to my partner, Jackson Matei of Spirit River Sound. He is a really brilliant audio engineer, and his setup and his expertise has really helped me so much with the production of this project. So thank you so much, Jackson. If you're getting value from this podcast out there in Radio Land, please consider leaving a review wherever it is you're listening. Just click on those stars, and hopefully 5 of them, and you spread the word that way. Or you can subscribe to get this in your inbox every week at astrosomatics.substack.com, or share it with a friend. I would really love to spread it along to people who might benefit or might get some insights from this podcast. as I watch flowers blooming all around me in this midsummer season, I'm envisioning how this project will blossom over time. And right now just feels kind of like, oh yeah, I feel blossomy. I feel ready to just emerge in that way. But I'm loving the methodical and slow and week by week diligence that it requires to make this. But I'm definitely looking forward to what's going to evolve out of it. And I'm considering launching a live container next year with the spring equinox. And that would have written prompts and a guidebook that you could print out, or a purchasable guidebook, and monthly live meetups, and a place to meet online as a community. And that would be just a place to kind of take this information of putting together all these cycles of time and talk about how the wheel of the year, how each section of the wheel of the year is showing up for each of us. I really love talking to this microphone here in this beautiful studio. And I also, even more than that, love talking to you and talking to people and hearing reflections on, how these things are showing up, either directed by your chart or just flow in through the year, through each of the 64 gates, each of the 12 zodiac signs, each of the 8 holy days of the pagan wheel of the year, and the 4 directions, and the 5 elements, and the Taoist system. And just kind of, the more I do it, the less abstract it seems and the more tangible to the world around me. And every time I have a conversation with someone, I get really excited about how it's reflecting in their world as well. 'Cause it's always a little bit different than my interpretation. So I would love to know if you'd be interested in something like that. It wouldn't start for a little while, but it would be just, a nice container to build community and to share about experiences in. So I'll keep you in the loop. Just reach out, leave a comment if you're interested in that. And now, on to the weekly forecast. So this week's highlights are the summer solstice ushering in Cancer season, the pagan holy day of Litha, the full moon in Capricorn, and in human design in the I Ching from June 18th to 24th. The sun is in gate 15, the gate of extremes, after leaving the gate of caution. And this week's themes are florescent blossoming, nurturance and gratitude for the abundance that we have, embracing the full spectrum of humanity's rhythms, diversity, and expression. And I would extend that into embracing the full spectrum of life's rhythms, diversity, and expression. The gate of extremes, it's just like all of the parts we're getting fed. So let's embrace and have gratitude for it all. In the wheel of the year, we are in the medicine wheel direction south, the direction of fire and youth, in the whooshing cycle element of fire that's between wood and earth. We're in the pagan season now of Litha, moving out of the Beltane season where we were from May 15th. And the zodiac season of Cancer is beginning on the solstice. That's June 20th to July 20th this year. And the moon phase is a full moon in Capricorn. So, solstice. Here we are. Happy solstice. I love the solstices so much. And the equinoxes as well. But solstices just really pack a punch. And we're here on the longest day, the shortest night. And it's just yummy and deep summer. And I'm wearing hardly any clothes. And it's just feels good. I don't mind the heat. It's definitely a little bittersweet, I guess, because from now on, the days are getting a little bit shorter. And that's just, I would say, though, like glass half empty thinking. I, for now, will choose to revel in the heat of the moment. Each year in the tropical zodiac's northern hemisphere, the summer solstice begins Cancer season. So the spring equinox begins Aries, the summer solstice begins Cancer, and the fall equinox begins Libra season, and then the winter solstice begins Capricorn season. So each one of those cardinal signs, there are 4 cardinal signs representing each of the elements, and they are the beginnings of each of these important days in the wheel of the year. So it's midway between the spring and autumn equinoxes now, and every year in Cancer season, the moon is full in the opposite sign of Capricorn. And so this year, the solstice, Cancer season, and the Capricorn full moon are all happening within a day of each other, which isn't always the case. But this full moon bringing in the solstice is a beautiful thing. So June 20th, Thursday of this week, is the solstice in Cancer season, and then the 21st is that full moon. So this year we also have a bonus round where there's a second full moon in the sign of Capricorn on July 21st. 12 months of the year, 13 moons of the year. There's always going to be 2 full moons in one of the signs every year, but this year it happens to be Capricorn. So get used to the Capricorn energy. I like thinking about the crab and the sea goat as these parallel creatures across the skies. The Capricorn and the sea goat is the ruler of Yule in the pagan wheel of the year and the winter solstice in the northern hemisphere. And the crab is the ruler of the summer solstice and midsummer, or Litha. And I think of Cancer, the crab, as this morphological animal that can live both on land and in water. And also its counterpart across the sky, Capricorn, the sea goat, is also an animal that can live on both land and in water. Capricorn season begins with the winter solstice, which is the shortest day. So both Cancer and Capricorn are signs of extremity, the dark and the light, the short and the long, winter, summer, hot and cold. There's a very distinct and obvious polarity with these two signs. As we know, every sign has a kind of sister sign or a polar opposite sign, or a sign of the extreme opposite, but it's unified within a singular axis and a singular kind of umbrella of the theme of life that it's all about. And Cancer and Capricorn I like a lot to think about the full moon in Capricorn and the season of Cancer, because it is so obvious. The summer versus winter is like really easy to conceptualize in our minds. And so I think, the crab and the sea goat sitting across the wheel from each other are on the axis of care and nurturance, as I see it. Some would call it the parent axis, or the axis of the mother and father, or maternal and paternal, with Cancer being ruled by the ever-adaptable mother moon, and Capricorn is ruled by the structured and strict daddy Saturn. And because of the extremities of their respective seasons, I kind of see Cancer and Capricorn as fierce and resilient signs, which are necessary attributes to thrive in the depths of summer and winter. The crab, in the extreme heat of summer, has developed a shell home around the tender body, and it's a place to retreat from the cacophony and aliveness and solar extremity of midsummer and the heat. Cancer lives on the cusp, the shore between worlds, and crabs can stay still for long periods of time. But then they're always available to pop into the water or climb up on rocks with agility and speed. And then on the other hand, the sea goat, I haven't spent as much time with sea goats as I have with crabs. I was just, down in Costa Rica a little while ago this year, and we were sitting in some tide pools, and there were tons of crabs just hanging out around the side, just so still, you could hardly see them. But then when a big wave would come, you'd just see them scuttling so fast away out of the water or into the water. But the sea goat, on the other hand, I don't know much about them, but as a mythical creature, they live in our dreams. I feel like I've had some dreams with sea goat in them. And when I think about the winter solstice or Yule in December, it's the longest nights, time of a lot of inwardness, a lot of reflection, a lot of sleeping, and a lot of dreaming. And so I feel like Capricorn being able to swim down to the depths and climb up to the craggy peaks is most true in our imagination, in our imaginal realm. And they're always moving and striving, and that's to stay warm in the coldest months. So the difference between the way these two creatures move in and out of water, between water and land, water and earth, is just such an interesting polarity, because they're doing the same thing, just at different levels, right? Based on what the seasons, weather, and temperatures are bringing up. Darkness versus light, cold versus heat. Like, you definitely have to keep moving and like setting goals when it's that cold. And when it comes to Cancer, when it's so hot, there's like, you're not thinking that far ahead, but you definitely want to be able to move quickly. Like, I'll be sitting in the sun by the pool and I'll be cold because I just got out of the pool, and then literally like 3 minutes later, this hot New Mexico sun is so blazing, and I'll be dried up to a crisp and like burning like so quickly right after being freezing a couple seconds before that. And so it's this agility, flexibility, nurturance, tending to the moment to moment, right? And that's kind of connected to the mother as well. When you think of a mother-father, maternal-paternal dichotomy, not to make this gendered in any way, it can go either way, but just traditionally, I think that a mother's brain having to tend to a small child in moment to moment, feeding them with her body, all of these things lead to that. Yeah, kind of just like being still, as calm as possible. And then when you got to run and catch a baby, because it's like jumping off of a couch, you can do that so quickly. And then the other end of the spectrum, the traditional father figure, is like thinking forward, ahead, how are we going to pay the bills, make the money? And I'm by no means think that this is the way it is anymore between genders. But I just like to think of how these dichotomies even came to be. And I think so much of it has to do with weather and with what season we're in, and the symbolism that comes from that. So yeah, Cancer's Capricorn axis, super fun to think about. In human design, moving on a little bit, and in the I Ching, we are moving into the gate of extremes, and it's known as humility or integrity in the I Ching. And as we've talked about already, the solstice is certainly a day of extremes. So I think it's fitting that in the I Ching and in human design, the solstice falls in this gate of extremes. It's also known as the gate of love for humanity. And this gate embraces the full spectrum of humanity's rhythms, diversity, and expression. Kind of like, the polarity between mother and father, and Saturn and the moon, very different energies. But this gate that spans the end of Gemini season into the beginning of Cancer season, it's a cusp gate, so it's not contained with any one zodiac season. It is able to hold a lot of different energies and a lot of polarities in a unified way. So when embracing extremes, whether it's in the hot weather of summer solstice or the emotional and philosophical differences that we find amongst our peers, it's important, I think, to maintain humility and integrity with ourselves. And it's important to lead from below and lead from behind, and not lead with our egos. So that's where the idea of humility comes from, in describing extremes. I think when I first came to this gate and this telling, I was like, how does humility and extremes fit together? But it really makes sense that in a world of highs and lows, ups and downs, having an inner authenticity and inner modesty and inner humility is a really key attribute. In the I Ching, hexagram 15 is Earth over mountain. And it's also known as authenticity, in addition to humility and integrity. And so we're beginning a new phase in this hexagram, where mountain is the lower trigram for the next 8 weeks, the next 8 gates. And So we've come out of Earth. We've been in Earth energy, the lower trigram being Earth for the past 8 weeks. And now for the next 8 weeks, we're moving into Mountain. So as I've mentioned before, the lower trigram in the I Ching represents kind of your internal world, and the upper trigram represents the external forces. So Mountain now for the next 8 weeks, starting with this week, is kind of taking over the role of the internal quality that we have, that mountain, that like filling ourselves with the fire of summer season, and kind of from this solstice on, just kind of owning that internal mountain. So Earth over Mountain would also be, considered mountain under Earth. And when you think about it that way, to me, it gives a really strong visual of humility and humbleness. You see the mountain there kind of covered in earth. You don't see the mountain, but yet it is still a mountain. It doesn't need to look down from up on high, and it doesn't need to show anyone anything. It doesn't need to, show off its craggy peaks or its snow-capped peaks, and but it's underground, right? It's this underground mountain, but it is still a mountain, and the earth sitting above it just really contains that and holds that. So I would say that really, for me, when I think about it, when I contemplate that, it just hits humility and humbleness and authenticity right there. Like knowing that being humble cuts through complication and pride of an overdeveloped ego. In Chinese language, the core of the word for integrity or humility is uniting. And that's kind of the sense of not merging into one, but holding two things closely together. And to make the word integrity, the character for words is added to uniting. So integrity is like uniting your words together to a singular meaning. So that you're like, it's again, holding these two extremes, these Cancer and Capricorn, the sea goat and crab, these sun and moon and heat and coldness, like holding them together and being in integrity by holding those things together and then uniting them through the power of your words. Recently, I've gotten a lot more interested in the gene keys. I've always been interested in them, but kind of came to the I Ching first in high school with a book that I had, and then discovered human design through a friend. And then the gene keys was kind of I downloaded a PDF about it in 2020, I think, and had no idea that it was connected to the I Ching or human design, actually. It was just like this other system of thought that I was kind of on the fence about even digging into, because it just seemed complex and I didn't know. And I think I had a friend at the time who was like, we were all talking a lot about spiritual bypassing in 2020 and about kind of like not wanting to just like use things like these systems of human design or gene keys or something to like give us excuses for not doing more. And there was a lot of conversation about that, a lot of conversation about, how to perceive our worlds without kind of bypassing. And I think that's a conversation that's still all the time very worth having. But anyway, this PDF of the gene keys sat on my desktop for like a long time and moved into my Drive folder. And eventually I opened it up again and was like, oh, this is the same thing. Richard Rudd, the founder and author of the gene keys, was a student and friend of Ra Uhuruhu, the founder of the human design. And they kind of split off, and basically they have very different ways of presenting this information, but it's it's similar in a lot of ways as well. But I think Ra, the human design guy, was a lot more about kind of like penetrating and piercing people with like almost like negging them. If you know what that means, it's like using kind of like a negative compliment to get people to react and respond in a really strong way. But Richard Rudd is a lot more kind of like about the higher our higher self and our higher version. And so within the gene keys, there are kind of 3 levels of each of these gates. So it's still working with the 64 gates, and they call them 64 gene keys, but they have kind of a different interpretation for like the evolution of this energy throughout someone's life or throughout the life of humanity. And so there is the shadow frequency of a gene key or gate. So in this case, it would be the shadow of the extreme. And then there is a gift frequency. And then there's a siddhi frequency, which is like the transcendent, unifying frequency. That's kind of like the enlightenment frequency. And so I've been really into this recently just because I've recently downloaded an audiobook of the Gene Keys book, and I find it a lot easier to listen and absorb the information there than to read it. And there's just, it's kind of a very pleasant voice that I can sit in my hot tub late at night and stare up at the stars and hear these contemplations is what they call them, and kind of let them wash over me. And I've found that I've gotten a lot of value from that. So I'll probably be bringing in more of this. I already have a little bit, as you've probably noticed. My conversation with Daje last week, we spoke to this, and occasionally I'll throw it in. But for those of you who are recurring listeners, I wanted to kind of explain where that's coming from. And for this gate, for 15 extremes, the shadow is dullness, the gift is magnetism, and the siddhi is florescence. And as I sat and listened to this chapter contemplation the other day on gate 15, on gene key 15, I was just kind of blown away. It got me really excited and kind of butterflies in my stomach, kind of excited just about the words that were being used and the way it's being described as this evolutionary process. So I'll dig into that just a little bit here. In terms of, the energy of extremes, the shadow of dullness relates to that feeling of kind of like drabness or boringness or dullness when we're not at one polarity or another. When we're not feeling a really strong feeling, it can feel kind of dull. And so rather than being on one polarity or another, we're in the middle of the axis where nothing is happening, right? There's not as much of a swing. And so people with this gate active in their charts might feel bored when things don't feel really up or really down. And they just kind of get stuck in that feeling of boring, dull drabness. But then, as people sit with that feeling of, if you're not used to having kind of moderate restraint in your life, and you start to have that, it could first feel dull, but then it could move, when you sit still with that dullness, it can move kind of more towards like a magnetism, and that's the gift level of this gene key and this gate. So I think about like having restraint and sitting still and not fluctuating between each polarity, but then becoming magnetic because you're holding both of the polarities. And so the way that a magnet itself is like a metal that is a unified body that has a strong force of unified polarities. And so, people with this gate active can be very magnetic once they learn to have a little bit of restraint and not feel dull in the unification of extremes. And then even at the more transcendent level, the siddhi level, which is florescence, kind of takes this magnetism and blossoms it into a contagious and overflowing abundance of pure energy. And when I feel into the Earth's energy center during this summer solstice season, or the Earth's energy, I feel that. I feel like big flower energy. It's like magnetism. I'm magnetized towards the abundance of the Earth at this time of year. And there's like giant blooms everywhere I go right now, and people are posting flowers all over social media. I'm seeing gorgeous blooms from all parts of the country thanks to social media. And there are also events and live music happening kind of nonstop around town, like I look at the Santa Fe summer guide and there's a lot going on. And the extreme heat of the day is getting really intense here, but it's starting to be cut by a dramatic and thunder lightning storm in the late afternoon that also feels kind of extreme. It's like super hot and then it gets kind of cold and rainy with lots of lightning strikes nearby. And yeah, just the blossoming nature of like all of the energy right now feels fluorescent, like fluorescent. Yeah, I think of little undersea fish that are fluorescent colors zipping around, or at Meow Wolf, the kind of immersive arts center here in Santa Fe, that you may have heard of. It's got a lot of fluorescent paint and kind of like it's dark, but there's these bright lights. And it also feels very extreme to be in a place where there's, artificial fluorescence happening or natural fluorescence in like the undersea world. But yeah, there's definitely an extremity, right, to fluorescence. But I'd never thought about the word fluorescence as related to flowers, really, somehow, even though flor obviously relates to flowers. But when I was reading the book on the gene key for this week, listening to that audiobook, it really struck me as an incredible concept. Like, fluorescence is flowers coming into bloom. That's what it is. Or like bursting into flower. And so like the concept of this as part of the gate of extremes is like, it feels dull to try to merge extremes in the middle. Like it's almost like feels ridiculous to be like, oh yeah, I'm going to take this extreme and that extreme, put it into this middle point and pretend that that's actually capturing the wholeness of everything. It like dulls it. It feels dull and it's like can't be contained there. And so then, a solid shape like a magnet, like an actual physical magnet, also is a little bit more like, oh yeah, this feels like I contain these extremes, I contain these polarities, and I attract things to me. I'm magnetic because I'm containing those things. But then like getting stuck at that level of being a magnet, being a solidly contained version of extremes is also impossible because extremes are always changing. The polarities are always getting more extreme, right? Or shifting a little bit, bringing new information in. And so fluorescence, the process of bursting into flower as this city level, as this kind of transformational, transcendent level, feels super appropriate. Like it is the verdance of nature. It is like the roses that are just blooming. And I saw one rose bloom in my front yard, and then all of a sudden there's like 7 on each branch. It's just like goes from once one happens and you don't know when it's going to happen. It's in a little tight little bud. And then once it blooms, then all of a sudden it's just like pop, 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 pop fireworks. There's like a lot more blooming all around you. Part of what they say in the Gene Keys about fluorescence is that it can't be chased, hurried, or enforced. It's spontaneous, unpredictable, and too wild for something like our minds to even conceptualize or follow. And then once fluorescence begins, it keeps expanding and popping off in many directions at once, always moving and growing and exploring and influencing others to do the same. Fluorescence demands an attitude of trust and surrender and childish delight. And I so feel that. It's my new favorite word, fluorescence, in this new way of thinking about it. Fluorescence, Richard Rudd says that fluorescence is the explosive chain reaction of enlightenment of all forms to the true nature of consciousness. I'll just say that one more time because it was just like mic drop moment when I heard this. I was like, fluorescence is the explosive chain reaction of enlightenment of all forms to the true nature of consciousness. I think that, I just feel that in my bones, like an uncontainable delighting in the everythingness, in both sides of the polarity, in all sides of the wheel, and in the extremes. Just finding like a real delight in it. The Gate of Extremes spans the transition between Gemini and Cancer season So to me, the progression between the energies of these 3 stages of the gene key feels perfect for that. A Gemini in its mature stages at the end of Gemini season kind of has come to the conclusion that even though they're really good at containing multitudes and buzzing around like a butterfly and a bee and doing lots of things and meeting lots of people, they can't possibly contain all of that, everything they've learned, everything they've transmitted within themselves. And so Cancer, being a sign that represents nurturance and the phases of the moon and the womb and the breasts and motherhood, Cancer knows that in order to care about something, we must one day let it go. And the way that mothers do, right? And so Cancer, the crab, flows from the dry rocks to the watery seas with ease and agility. And to me, this evokes the city florescence of the 15th gate, which is the surrender and the release of control and giving permission for beauty and truth to blossom in their own time, on their own accord. So, yeah, just sitting with that for a minute, like this transition between these 2 signs, between these 2 zodiac seasons, really just feels like, yeah, rather than trying to hold it all the multitudes, it's this kind of like, watery release, going from the air of Gemini to the water of Cancer and kind of just letting there be a bit of surrender. And that's when the flowers blossom, is when you kind of stop trying to do it all and be it all, but just let it go, release. And then there it is, pop, 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 fireworks. Yay. I just think it's so beautiful how these systems of thought kind of come together sometimes. Finally, we will talk a little bit about Litha, just the pagan midsummer celebration. So, each week we talk about 1 or 2 I Ching hexagrams or human design gates or gene keys. And we dive into an aspect of the zodiac season we're in and usually also highlight a little bit about the element of the season as described by the medicine wheel or the Taoist 5-element system. But we don't get to talk about the pagan wheel of the year too much because it's these holy days. It's like these very seasonal holidays and markers of time. And so we talk about those about every 6 weeks and the wheel of the year. And today is one of those lucky days. So the pagan wheel of the year, just as a little reminder, it celebrates the holy days of the solstices and the equinoxes, and also the cross-quarter days between the equinoxes and the solstices. So the midway points between the equinoxes and solstices. And the last one we talked about was Beltane, when we had a conversation with Lisa Brogy, the astrotherapist. You can go back and listen to that conversation if you like. If you want to tap into the previous holy day. Beltane was also a fire holiday, just as Litha is a fire holiday. And it occurs on summer solstice and coincides with Cancer season. And it symbolizes the peak of the sun's power and when the sun's kind of showering and gracing the earth with abundant light and warmth. The word Litha itself is derived from the Anglo-Saxon word for midsummer, so it's also known as midsummer, a midsummer night's dream. Just adjusting in my chair. Okay, so yeah, midsummer. I'd say that the solstice is really important, obviously, and we can see that through archaeology. Stonehenge is a very good example where the light falls directly onto the center stone on the summer solstice. And it's a celebration of fire, at least in Europe. It's, as I mentioned, the last holy day, Beltane, was also a fire holiday. And so this season between Beltane, which is like May Day, and now, so beginning of May to middle of June, end of June, is fire season in a big way in both the indigenous medicine wheel, many versions of it, as well as the Wuxing 5-element cycle in Taoist China. And that makes a lot of sense. I mean, we don't have to go too far. It can be to think about the solar season of this extreme solar as the season of fire. But here we are in another fire holiday. The Celts celebrated Litha with hilltop bonfires and dancing, so getting close to the sun, going up on a hill to get close to the sun. And they would jump over bonfires and jump through bonfires for good luck. And in other parts of ancient Europe, people would set large wheels on fire, and like wagon wheels, and roll them down a hill into a body of water. This bonfire jumping and other fire ceremonies symbolize cleansing things from the last half of the year, since Yule, the winter solstice, that we're ready to release, and purifying things before the wheel of the year turns again and starts edging towards darkness away from light. And it also, the fire ritual represents stepping through the threshold from one part of the year to another. There's some traditions like neo-paganism and Wicca where Litha is when a mythological battle between light and dark takes place. And this is a battle between the Oak King and the Holly King. And they battle for control, with the Oak King representing daylight and the Holly King representing night. And each solstice, they battle for power. So on Yule and the winter solstice, the Oak King wins and rules the world until Litha. Well, it's because the days are getting longer, so that half of the year is ruled by the Oak King. But on Litha, this week, the Holly King wins the battle, and the days begin to get steadily darker until Yule. So there's a lot of different goddesses and gods associated with the solstice in different traditions, like Celtic goddess Danu, who represents earth and fruitfulness. So it's about nature's bounty, as well as the radiant energy of the sun, and this contrast of extremity between light and dark. So celebrating Litha is a practice of immersing ourselves in this radiant energy and the abundance of nature, and honoring the fertile energy of nature, and celebrating beauty and magic of the natural world. It's just like, go outside, go camping, go like pick a flower, go smell a flower. As the wheel of the year turns, Litha is a reminder of the interconnectedness between humanity and the natural world, as all of these holy days are. And by coming together in celebration and gratitude and reflection, we can honor the sun's life-giving energy and affirm our commitment to living in harmony with the cycles of nature. I think that Litha and the solstice in general feels energetically similar to the vibes of the full moon each month, where there's a lot of light and energy, and we can feel kind of revved up and hyped up. But there's also kind of like an intensity of emotion and potential for sleeping less because the nights are shorter, and so not necessarily feeling super regulated. So that's why we enter Cancer season right after this, or and go into that kind of more inward, reflective, watery sign, because we're at this peak now. It's almost like, Mardi Gras or Carnival is like right before Lent. You do a massive celebration, and then you go and you give some things up for a while. And you just say, hey, I don't actually need that anymore because I've expressed it fully. So this is the week of expressing it fully and indulging and jumping over those bonfires if you want. I'm curious if you celebrate solstice in any way. I'd love to know in the comments how this peak sun time of year is showing up for you, whether it's in your body or in your mind or in your rituals and practices. For me, I plan to continue my neighborhood wildflower walks and making art and being expressive, and I'm going to do a little camping trip this week and find a place to feel the sun on my skin and embrace and feel gratitude for that. Hopefully with my toes in a creek too, to welcome the water sign of Cancer. And overall, I'm just focusing on gratitude this week, and for these flashes of beautiful, delicate color amongst the grays and browns, but also feeling gratitude for the grays and browns themselves. And, this is less of a time of less of a ritualistic time of inward introspection and spiritual reflection, and more like owning that fire element quality, and that mountain under earth element quality of kind of just containedness within our own authenticity and with our connection and interconnection to the world around us. So yeah, if you can, have a fire, but be safe. And I really hope that you have a beautiful, beautiful midsummer celebration, however it is that you're celebrating this week. And next week, we'll be entering the first full week of Cancer season and also gate 52 in Human Design and I Ching. And this is the gate of stillness. How appropriate for the first gate of Cancer season to be still like those little crabs on the edge of the tide pools. And so, before knowing that the stillness is coming and that there's time for the inward contemplation and there's this whole month ahead of Cancerian emotionality and feeling the feels, I think just embrace this last little bit of Gemini, buzz around, see your people, have some fun, feel gratitude, and blossom and bloom and just be inspired by these flowers that are all around you. Stop and smell them, like for real this time. And next week, you can crawl into your Cancerian shell and take a little break from the heat. Until then, all my best. Have a wonderful, wonderful solstice. And like, share, comment, do all the things. Thanks so much for listening to Cycles of Time.